computer. Very nice. So, all right, day 2 of our Covideo making. When I went back to yesterday's recording, I thought that, there were so many interesting points that came out of it. So today we are going to start with a backdrop, and so we are always going to assume a model that we are working against and a particular view of that model or a new model. Where I want to start today is a slight reorientation of yesterday's scene, where in some sense I want to recast what the scene was like, which was sort of highlighting, at least in the actual photograph itself, is highlighting the housing of the migrants, but reoriented in such a way that it almost is a way of preventing the migrants from going where they're going, right? So this idea of the wall, and given how much migration and immigration has been discussed in the last few months and years, actually, in the context of walls and boundaries and borders, one of the things that I want to see if we can talk about is how does this particular narrative of migration, which is around the COVID epidemic, how does it connect to what until recently was the single biggest narrative about migration, which is boundaries and borders and immigration, right? And so I sort of picked a view that explicitly kind of brings a barrier and a wall into the picture. So I don't know if you guys have any thoughts that you want to share about that. Both of you are muted, by the way.
Ram, do you want to go first, please?
So, I mean, migration and is sort of inextricably linked to identity, I think. And sort of that's sort of the rub. So I think what's simultaneously happening is so it's a little confusing now, and I don't know have we all become Indian in the face of this overwhelming threat? Is a question I have. This image seems to suggest no, or have like classes sort of coalesced in are we marching towards a sort of just dual society? Will previous divisions sort of stay, or will new ones assert themselves? Is actually an interesting and I think almost open question, and I think the migration conversation actually depends on the answers to that. So Vinutha and I have been talking about like what is the I didn't share my screen. Let me share my screen. I think what's striking between the two images is that the same fault lines appear, interestingly. And from our last conversation also, what we're looking at is an image of a previous exercise where we looked at a Kirana store in the context of a COVID outbreak, and what happens when. So can you guys hear that audio?
I can't.
So I suddenly feel like economic fault lines are imposing themselves over and above, and in some cases they perfectly match social fault lines, and so that works out really well. In other places they don't precisely map to that. But this seems to have converted us into a economic overclass and underclass, sort of in this very stark way. And maybe people are even united in their being in one category or another, which is.
So you mean a
sort
kind
of
of class
strange-
consolidation?
Yeah, yeah. On economic lines, it's almost as if in the war of the institutions of culture and the market, you know, and that's sort of been the culture war of this time, right? Like it's sort of the current dispensation sort of really brought that to the fore and reminded us that we are Indian and we are proud, sort of being able to evoke that sensation very powerfully. And then suddenly this happens to us, and it sort of tells you that harsh economic realities sort of trump all else. And, you know, it could be used to justify all sorts of future directions, which previously may not have been possible, given the. And I mean, to put this in the context of migration, I think that I think there's going to be a balkanization of the country. There already was, but you're going to have this poor state, rich state kind of thing, and those migrants all hunched together, and you know what used to be caste names will now become entire state names. अरे ये लोग तो झारखंड से हैं, इनको भगा दो, or we should protect our. So inter is will there be a new rise of this kind of parochialism?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just sort of. I wonder though, because our culture is always shown incredible ability to absorb everything that it comes in contact with. So,
right.
So I'm not sure.
All right. So I'm back to sharing my screen in a minute. Thanks for evoking that, Aram, because I think you're right that migrants have perhaps become an even bigger symbol of what our nation is or does not want to be than it was before, right? I mean, 2 months ago, we were talking about Bangladeshi immigrants or, potentially immigrants from other countries. Now the internal migrants are the narrative. Yeah. And I don't know where that's going to take us. And this is a very important point, I think, that we should cover. But now I'm going to invite Alok. Maybe you can say a couple of words about this scene, and then we'll shift to the models that the new models that you're going to spring upon us.
So it's interesting that you raised the point of walls, because I did not see it earlier from that perspective. To me, this entire situation brings to the fore the limitations, no pun intended here, but the limitation of our models to organize our cities, because a pandemic does not know these boundaries that we're imposing on geography. And it's similar for climate change as well. So this is only a trailer of what is to follow. And in many ways, I feel that there is this huge mass of people which have become now surplus for XYZ reasons. Either they have built the cities they were supposed to build, and they're no longer needed in the same capacity, or maybe industrialization, in some cases automation. And obviously I'm speaking of a global phenomena here, not specific to India. And being in the West, my perspective is also very zoomed out, 30,000 feet view. So what we keep hearing again and again, being repeated in different narratives and WhatsApp groups, is that we have way too many people. So like it's gotten so obscene that at some point I've also heard people saying that, oh, this will be a fine way to get rid of a few people. And so that sort of mentality that our systems have rendered
I've
people
heard that several
useless.
times in the last couple of days, actually.
Right. And which was surprising for me, because I thought this is a time for empathy. This is a time when you want to, show solidarity with people and be generous and, come together and act in to help people who are in need. But then suddenly that I keep hearing this narrative again and again in different groups, and it's really surprising. And then you realize that this is the magic of this entire system, that it has rendered people irrelevant, and we would rather, you know uh, have a pandemic or climate change or something else do the job for us. And and the real thing, the underlying challenge in all of it is the structure of our society, with the with districts and states and nation states, uh, which were initially supposed to be administrative units. They they have become, I mean, they are also the reason why we're failing, because they don't talk to each other, they don't communicate. Delhi suddenly decides that they're going to close the border, but the UP government is not part of that decision. So, and so on and so forth. uh, Rajesh.
I mean, so I shifted the perspective while you were talking, Alok, only because again, the contrast is, that there is a march towards progress that you can see going towards what I call it industrial heaven, right over there. There's industrial heaven in the.
I have another view. I
Uh-huh.
slightly improvised on this one yesterday.
ठीक है, दिखाओ.
Is this visible?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Slight change to the pylons
Uh-huh.
and so on. Yeah.
Very nice. And somehow
So,
it's interesting, right? That especially the view that you're just showing, Alok, the
mhm.
pylons have a kind of, they themselves are bearing witness in a certain way, right? They are silent witnesses.
Yeah.
So is this one of the new models, or is this?
No.
I like
Sorry,
I
go
like
ahead.
how the pylons now go to the actual point of infinity where the
Uh-huh.
lines actually converge.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
that's what earlier it was drifting away from the actual point of infinity. Now it goes to.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's got that projective view to it. So do you want to take us through one of the new models?
Sure. Hmm. I should have actually opened it beforehand, but it's taking a while.
Strangely, while we are waiting for Alok, one of the things that one of the resonances I got from the pylons not going to infinity, but sort of drifting away, they reminded me really of some of those, the Japanese, Chinese style of painting like Hokusai, where there's a kind of there's a conceptual abstraction of nature, except that this is not of nature, it's of industrial civilization.
Yeah, the Edo period.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of negative space.
Yeah.
And the negative space was the point.
Sorry, this is taking longer than I expected it to.
Ah, nice.
should I rotate through the model? And I just thought that this was some of the more relevant things right now going on globally, with people struggling with PPE and uh, world supply chains scrambling to provide that. And when companies like 3M are talking about increasing their production, almost actually doubling their production, to from 1 billion masks to 2 billion masks, we are still talking about a few 100,000 masks in India procuring overall.
Yeah. In fact, in a slightly different statistic, I read that, I mean, it seems to have been said almost proudly that we did 6,000 tests today. And that's the greatest that we have done in a day. And I mean, I don't know whether to laugh or to cry, actually. So,
but we can also come back to this model tomorrow, because I've just thrown it out there. We don't have to talk about it today.
You said you have one more. Why don't we see the full bouquet of flowers?
I think this is also to me it echoes the previous model very powerfully, especially this guy with the helmet.
Not that guy, right?
No, not this guy.
Can you go back to the previous one?
Sure.
Visually, there's definitely an echo, right? Because it's the same white kind of hazmat.
And the human is literally just a little bit of pink that you can see just around them, and is enveloped by these synthetic, sterile,
Yes.
It's almost like this infestation that even the shape of the bed, you can almost see that, it's shaped like a human. It's like, to me, it's almost like archaeology, right? Like where you dig down like into the layers and you find the artifacts, and it tells you all about the society, right? So this is like the archaeological artifacts of this time.
Yeah.
And it's sort of this powerful symbol of, so just it's like those, I would almost juxtapose this with all the graves where people,
right,
that are found, they'll find a Neanderthal grave, there'll be like some jewelry in it or something like that. They'll say, look, these people loved, they cared and thought. But what does this archaeological dig tell us, say about us, I guess?
And I'm wondering if, especially these beds are maybe disposed in some not too distant future, because they are infected. I mean, that it's like nuclear waste. They have to be buried underground in some fashion to keep it from reinfecting us, right? If there will be some mass grave of hospital beds, which will become our
right,
or masks,
or of masks.
Yeah,
which is going. I mean, that is going to be another challenge, because we're producing billions and billions of them around the world.
And it's such a clear archaeological marker, right? So when the aliens come and they'll dig into that landfill, and they'll find this layer when there's all these masks everywhere. Those things probably just don't degrade either. So
no,
probably fossilized by that time.
Yeah.
But to like the images that we were discussing about yesterday and this one as well, like to me, both of them have the same quality, which remind of one of those sci-fi movies when the society has reached a point where we have to remove all those um, differences and diversities, and you have to crease the all the folds in the bed sheet, because we want everything to be prim and proper, and everything has to be white, and it's supposed to be some designer's dream. And I shared a blurb with Rajesh about a course at Harvard, which is being now being offered, and it talked about the core of the problem being these unplanned, unregulated areas in low and middle income countries. As if that itself is the problem. Like seriously, in 2020, we're talking about unregulated, unplanned areas, and that is somehow the reason for pandemics and other things, and not all the economic forces which are unleashing these.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think that is going to become a bigger, I mean, meaning this arm of, if you remember how slum clearance was seen as a progressive move,
Yeah.
right? I think some of those rhetorics are going to re-emerge. I'm 100% sure, right? That, for example, we know this, that in the West, in fact, where very close to where you, Alok, and I are, in the 19th century, ordinances were passed so that people could not keep animals in their homes. And that
Mhm.
was passed as a public safety measure, right? Because again, with, you could say, fears similar to what we have today. But it also became a way to prevent people from having sources of food and income outside the industrial economy.
Yeah.
And so this merger of the needs of capital and the needs of public safety, it'll be interesting to see how the how there are new narratives that will come up, either already have or will soon.
And like authorities don't really have to go back. I'm, uh, you know, much in history. Like only a few decades ago, we've seen public health being repeatedly used as a tool
Mhm.
or as a rationale to sanitize cities.
Yes.
So my thesis for the qualifying paper was that a similar sort of a sanitization of urban spaces to give uh, using a cultural preservation narrative
Uh-huh.
that some of the older cities need to be presented or be
Right.
ready to receive international tourists, and for that we have to get rid of the riffraff in the city, and the riffraff obviously becomes uh, either economically poorer people who are then also overlap with the people who are a threat to the public health of the community in general.
Yeah. Very interesting. Um,
You
the
know,
other,
sorry.
no, no, go ahead, Aram.
Uh, so normally post-apocalyptic images, like if you look at all the movies, the metaphor was like the aftermath of a nuclear explosion,
Yes.
or the aftermath of war. I think we now have a new image. It's the post-apocalypse of sterility, where everything is clean and white and pristine, and it's apocalyptic.
Yes. In fact, I, oh, somebody who I actually appreciate, Meghna Chakravarti, who's NPR announced, newscaster. She was saying, about these images of India in the post-lockdown. I mean, she's an Indian American, but she says that all the images and memories that she has of visiting family are of these really bustling cities, and I'm wondering if there will be exactly this post-apocalyptic Indian city, which is that Cartesian city that we all the upper classes have dreamt of, right?
Singapore.
Singapore. So, um, but but the other thing, as you were talking, Ram, that came to me is that um, this is going to be a banal apocalypse, right? So in some sense, instead of it being this Mad Max landscape, it'll be a landscape that um, may look actually almost too ordinary, or in fact better than ordinary, right? That images that were until recently or even now seen as positive images will be the symbols of the apocalypse.
Yeah. I mean, there are echoes of that in Tim Burton's work. You know, if you see Edward Scissorhands,
Yeah.
you know, so the Edward Scissorhands world is just plastic and shiny and absolutely, nothing natural and organic
Right.
is allowed. I wonder if this will turn against nature itself in a certain way. Like as these sanitized spaces start occupying your fields of vision and closing out everything, will people, as they already do in the West and in other, places like I remember so clearly when I was still in my shooting days, we were shooting in this place called Bhor, which is near Pune. And this child who was young child actor from Bombay who had been hired to play the role of a village kid, standard, because he has to be upmarket and fair skinned, right? So village boy has to be brought from somewhere. And he had to run through a field barefoot. That was and his mother would not let him because she was scared that he would run through grass or on dirt. Like the level of distrust was so intense, like literally running on dirt or through vegetation itself was crawling with bugs and germs and bacteria and snakes and stinging things. And this is the very opposite of that.
That's an interesting thought that maybe this will, I mean, it could go in two radically different ways, right? One is a deep recognition of how interconnected we are with the rest of nature. And the other is put a bigger wall, right?
Yeah.
And the possibility of latter happening in our current society is more.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, but that's also an opportunity that this is where someone can intervene and start changing the narrative. That look, there is this interconnectedness, linking it back to our previous image, that there is interconnectedness beyond the walls, and there is an interconnectedness beyond this dichotomy of nature versus us.
Right. Very interesting. Maybe that's a good place for us to cap our conversation, or the recorded part of our conversation for today. And let's see if I can, how do I stop